Hey guys, back again to cover the season 2, week 3 lineup that I did. Week 3 had a different format once again, and this is going to be the last of the Swiss tournaments, which means we're going to switch to round robin play starting next week, which I think will continue to be Conquest, 4 decks, 1 ban. So this is the last week we're mixing it up, but this week was Specialists, so that means we have to bring 1 class and 3 different types. 3 decks with some side decking, if you will, included in them. I decided to bring Turtle Mage this week, along with Eddie as well. We had a bit of a different, I'm not going to say different take, because most of our cards are very much the same, but I think we had very different tech cards. So let me just kind of break down what this deck does. The big sort of combo is that you get to turn 8 or 9, you get down to a Tutorial and Pilgrim. With only 3 spells in the deck, you're guaranteed to discover, unless you've drawn both copies, you're guaranteed to discover Potion of Illusion, which copies the Pilgrim, which leaves a 1 mana, 1/1 Pilgrim in your hand, which you can play again, copies both Pilgrims. You have 2 1/1 Pilgrims in your hand now that cost 1. You play the third one, you freeze the board with either Blizzard or Nova still left in your deck, and then you have a 1/1 Pilgrim that you can use to copy the board again or to freeze again, or ideally both, and you start just generating a full board of 1/1s while freezing the board every turn and start pushing your opponent out of the game that way. There's some cards in here that you can copy as well. For example, if you're under pressure, you can end up copying a lot of Farseers or Carta Defenders to heal back up against more aggressive decks or decks that want to just burn you out. You have Nightblade against control-heavy decks where you need to close the game out yourself and need to do extra damage. You end up doing the full Pilgrim combo, and then you go Nightblade, 1 mana Pilgrim to copy both of them. Now you have a 1 mana 1/1 Nightblade and a Pilgrim, and you keep going on like that. Now, the main thing is you just need to get to that late game, turn 9 or 10, to be able to get the full combo off. And once you get that rolling, the game becomes a lot easier. So the important thing is getting to that stage in the game, which is why you'll see a lot of early game cards here, very early curve, to try and fight for the board to make sure you stay alive until that final, that basically combo you need. It's really a long, it's kind of weird to call it a combo, but it kind of is a combo. It's just a super, super long, grindy combo. This is very similar to what Eddie brought week 2 in terms of Turtle Mage. I think this might only be like 1 or 2 cards, if it even is 1 or 2 cards off. I think it's only 1 card off. But the main deck I didn't think needed changing too much. The field was expected to be Priest, so I thought Turtle Mage was a good idea to bring in terms of that because it has a good matchup against Priest. They do have Mindrender Lucia, which makes the game a lot more complicated if they dump all your Pilgrims once they switch hands with you. So it's not quite as simple as it may be on ladder against people who don't know how to play against the deck or against people who aren't playing Priest. But I still think it was a good idea to bring this in a field of Priest, and it still does well against some of the other decks as well, namely Druid. And with some side deck adjustments, can be good against some other decks as well. I'm not going to talk too much about these cards. It's just early cards to help you stay alive, Battlecry minions that you can copy with Pilgrim and get extended value with, bouncing them over and over again. The main thing to note for people who haven't played the deck is Sphere of Sapience is in here as well, which can help curate your draws and also make sure that if you end up drawing Potion of Illusion, you can choose to put it on the bottom of your deck so you don't actually draw both of them, which means you can continue doing Pilgrims until you run out of cards. There's a lot of really cool stuff that you can do with this deck. If you save Solarian, eventually late game you can keep copying Solarians, putting them back in your deck, and staving off fatigue, which actually did happen in a game against Eddie round 1, which is pretty cool. But the deck's really wacky. It's very difficult to play, but I think it has a good placement in the meta. Now, the first side deck, I changed a few cards here. Doomsayers are out, Oozes are out. Main thing to note is that in case people brought weapons, Ooze I think was necessary, especially in the first deck. But I didn't think too many people were going to bring Warrior because everyone else was going to bring weapon text, which makes it less likely as a bring, but it's still worth it having the Oozes in there as an early game tempo play, and as well as hitting the odd Warrior that does come up. It can hit some Rogues as well. I expected some Rogues as well, which my third list will be for that, or any aggressive decks in general, maybe even the Stray Hunter if someone decides to bring that. But the second deck was meant for teching against Priest and Druid. You'll see 2 copies of Neophyte, which helps against Druid, stops the early ramps, gets you to your late game turns faster. There's a Bully here, which helps against Priest. It makes Mindrender Lucia cost 8 mana, so if they switch hands and decks with Mind Ray Lucia for 8 mana, your 1 mana 1/1 Pilgrim will be 6 mana. So they can't Mind Render and dump your Pilgrims, which stops them from doing that. It's still kind of difficult to do in practice, but it's a tech card that helps against that. Messenger Raven, I liked including a copy of this, and Eddie liked it so much he ended up including 2 copies of it, despite not telling me about it. But it's fine. What this does, this replaced the Farseer. What this does is it gives you, first of all, I can just give you another Observer or something, just as something to throw on the board. It can discover Mage minions, and Jandis is a pretty good Mage minion against both Druid and Priest. And Pilgrim is a good Mage minion. If you don't already have the Pilgrim, this gives you an extra chance of discovering it, so you have it by turn 8 or 9. So we had 2 Neophytes added, the Raven, Bully, and I added a War Mage as well. Eddie really likes this card. I think it's kind of not that great. Against Druid in particular, you might have to use the Blizzards in hand to actually get to that late game scenario I've been talking about, which means that the War Mage is kind of useless, but Eddie seems to really like it against Priest, which is why I included it. And I think it's worth having it in here against Priest because you don't tend to use Blizzards that often against Priest. They're not super aggressive, so you can hold on to Blizzard and War Mage, and this does A, more than the Nightblade in terms of damage, and B, it can also help clear up the board if you want to focus on a board-centric game plan instead of just trying to burn out your opponent. Yeah, pretty cool. And finally, the third deck, we ended up cutting Lorekeeper Polkelt, which notably, let's talk about that real quick for those who don't know. Reorder your deck from the highest card to the lowest card, which means that once you play this, your next draw will be Pilgrim, and then Kartit or Blizzard, and then the other Kartit or Blizzard, and so on, all the way up, back up the list. So this guarantees you have Pilgrim as fast as possible. That being said, it means you won't have any of the other utility cards, so you better hope that you can win with what you have here. But against most matchups, when you play Pilgrim, you tend to start winning. That gets cut in this third deck because against aggro, you don't really care about drawing the Pilgrims. Obviously, they help, but the more important thing is just staving off the aggression and making sure you don't die. And if you happen to get to a Pilgrim combo, great. That'll probably win you the game. So we ended up cutting, well, this is my idea. I ended up cutting Lorekeeper Polkelt, the 2 Blizzards, because it generally was inefficient to pay 6 mana for a Blizzard when you need to do other stuff to fight for board. And it also means that Pilgrim has 1 less spell to pull from your deck, but to make up for that, I've added 1 Ancient Mysteries and 2 Ice Barriers, which will help a lot against mainly an aggressive rogue archetype, which I was expecting to see some of, and which some people did end up bringing, and maybe some Face Hunter as well. It could help against Warrior too, quite frankly. You don't need Blizzards. You can just Nova the board every turn. You don't have to clear your opponent's board. If you freeze it every turn, it's still fine. So this could also technically help against Warrior because it still keeps the oozes and gives you some extra health, both against Bomb Warrior and against Egg Warrior, which I didn't expect to see many of, if any at all. But just in case, I think Rogue was likely enough that I wanted an anti-aggro side list. We still keep the Bone Wraith. What else was added here? And 1 Depth Charge to help, again, solidify the early game tempo, making sure they don't get on the board, or at least trying to delay it as long as possible to the point where we make sure our observers start going off, we draw more cards, we get our taunts, perhaps we get to the Pilgrim combo and start copying more heals or taunts, etc. And yeah, did a lot more poorly. I did a lot worse this week than the previous weeks. I started off with 4-1 on day 1 of Swiss and then ended 4-5, not winning a single game on day 2. I think I got really, really unlucky in pretty much every single set. There were a couple minor mistakes, but none of them were really game breaking. And I just felt like my opponents had the right cards every single set, which is, you know, kind of whiny, but that just happens when you play against good players and they have the good cards. You're probably going to lose, even if you have a pretty favorable lineup. Anyways, that's all for me. Deck codes are below, in the comments. Otherwise, subscribe, go follow me on Twitter and Twitch and so on, and I'll see you guys next week with the next video.